The battle against Satan in the city of Grams is reaching its climax. The apostles must work together with everyone in the Halidom to save the entire continent from being consumed and destroyed by Satan. One of these apostles was deemed a traitor, albeit misled, and now joins our ranks. He is Basileus, and is a 5-star Win-1 unit. Basileus ranks higher than all of the other apostles besides Regina, and is admired for his combat expertise. His kit reflects his combat expertise pretty well. If you look at his art, you can see that the wand he is using is also a sword. While his sigil remains locked, he has 2 styles of combat, melee and ranged, which depend on the proximity of enemies from Basileus. Such a complex kit will be further mentioned in detail. Basileus has a unique combo chain that changes depending on what style of combat he uses. His close quarters combat, ranged combat, and sigil released all have unique combo chains with varying multipliers. He also has a unique force strike, which hits up to 12 times, and up to 3 enemies at maximum charge level. When his sigil is locked, he has 3 different charge levels. When his sigil is released, he only has 1 charge level, that is equivalent to a level 3 force strike. Both of Basileus's skills have 3 variants depending on the state of his sigil and combat styles. His first skill, Ventus Impalement, costs 3148 SP. During close quarters combat, it deals 1734% damage to surrounding enemies, reduces their strength by 20% for 15 seconds, and grants a defense amp, with a maximum team amp level of 2. During ranged combat, it deals 1120% damage, and inflicts Storm Lash. During sigil released, it deals 2191% damage to surrounding enemies, reduces enemy strength by 20% for 15 seconds, inflicts Storm Lash, and grants the same defense amp as the close quarters variant. At close quarters, it deals decent damage, a bit low for the SP cost but still acceptable, with the 20% strength reduction a useful affliction for Basileus to inflict on enemies. The ranged variant deals low damage, but is compensated for by its ability to inflict Storm Lash. The variant during sigil released is basically combining the strengths of both variants into one powerful skill. High modifiers, Storm Lash, Strength Reduction, and Defense Amp all from one skill, making this form an incredible skill to have on a unit. Overall, this skill is made up of 2 halves which are united when Basileus's sigil is released. His second skill, Spiritus Sanction, costs 5520 SP. It deals 1903% damage to frontal enemies during close quarters combat, dispels a buff from each enemy, and crests a debuff zone around the user that reduces enemy defense by 5%. At ranged combat, it deals 1535% damage in a line, and inflicts Storm Lash. During sigil released, it deals 2265% damage to frontal enemies, dispels a buff from each enemy, decreases enemy defense by 10% for 10 seconds, and inflicts Storm Lash. This is also a shareable skill, which will always use the sigil released variant. Again, the close quarters variant deals good damage accompanied by debuffing enemy defense. Having a debuff zone around the user is different from what we have, but this also proves to be advantage, as it becomes easier to deal with more mobile enemies by just moving towards the enemy and hug the enemy close in order to apply the defense reduction. The ranged variant has low damage modifiers and has the exact same functionality as the first skill by being able to inflict Storm Lash. This is basically the same as her first skill, except for the animation and SP cost. The sigil released variant uses the best from each variant, but also changes the form of defense reduction into a direct defense reduction skill, which is much better than having a debuff zone, as this increases consistency of defense reduction towards enemies. Overall, this skill shares a similar pattern with the first skill, as well as similar characteristics, including being an incredibly powerful skill during sigil released. Basileus's co-abilities are quite normal and unremarkable. He has the standard skill damage co ability for wand units, as well as the 10% water resist when combo count is 10 or higher. It's an unremarkable chain co ability, but can be easily achieved. Basileus is resistant to bog, which in my personal opinion, is preferred over freeze resist. For his Covenant ability, he has a sigil with the Archangel Michael. Typical of Covenant abilities, this ability inflicts the locked sigil effect on Basileus for the first 5 minutes. While having the locked sigil effect, he also has a unique force strike with 3 charged levels, which has been elaborated in the unique combo chain section. This ability is also the one that contributes to Basileus's unique gameplay by creating a combat zone around him during the locked sigil effect. When enemies enter the combat zone, Basileus will engage in close quarters combat. Otherwise, he'll utilize ranged combat. The vicinity of enemies within the combat zone also affect the effects of his skills. Regarding the reduction of the remaining time of the locked sigil effect, Basileus can reduce its duration by 15 seconds for every 25 hit combo, and that's it. The requirement is relatively straightforward when compared to his fellow apostles. When the locked sigil effect wears off, Basileus will be granted the sigil released effect. During this effect, his force strike, standard attack patterns, and skill effects change. He also loses his combat styles as well as the combat zone. This is a long ability, but basically, it makes Basileus a very unique unit to play, at least for the first 5 minutes or less. The requirement for the reduction of the locked sigil duration is quite easy to achieve, and when his sigil is released, he sacrifices his uniqueness in gameplay for significantly more powerful skills and attacks. His second ability is also an impressive ability to have on any DPS unit. For every 15 hit combo, it grants Basileus over damage, based on 30% of his strength. The effect will persist, as long as Basileus keeps his combo counter from resetting. Over damage is a good source of damage, and having it on a unit like Basileus, who no longer needs to depend on other healers for over damage, further increases Basileus's own DPS. Basileus is obviously a DPS unit, albeit having a very interesting gameplay. That doesn't affect his build though, with a main DPS build being a totally viable build for him. As both of his skills apply debuffs on the enemy, including debuff time extension is also a good decision when building him. For his dragon of choice, Michael will be released sometime in the future, and he will most probably be the best dragon for him, typically because the apostles and their respective archangels have abilities that complement with each other perfectly. For now, both Voke and Reborn Zephyr are great choices for Basileus, as these two have high damage modifiers, and can enhance DPS in one way or another. Though I prefer Zephyr more, as Voke's powerful kit has a side effect in the form of shredding Basileus's affliction resistance. If these two dragons aren't available, any offensive dragon will do. For his teammates, there isn't any particular team setup that Basileus will perform better in, though having a unit or a shared skill that can gather enemies will be nice, to allow Basileus to approach them and attack them more effectively with his close quarters combat style, as the skill damage of his CQC style is higher and provides debuffs. For his Windprint setup, these are what I currently use on Basileus. A full focus on his own DPS with a hint of debuff time extension, to make greater use of his debuffs. I normally do not use Punisher prints as they become obsolete in longer battles, when enemies build up resistance towards afflictions. Basileus, the last apostle to become playable in the game, is definitely an interesting and viable unit in the game. He has high skill damage mods in his CQC style, and during sigil released, and also possess the capability to inflict debuffs, easily inflict Storm Lash, and provide defensive support through defense amps. His impressive skill mods and capabilities during sigil released is further improved by an easy to achieve duration reduction of his locked sigil state. Lastly, his own built-in over damage provides additional damage, on top of his already good DPS capabilities. His ranged combat style is his obvious weakness though, having low skill damage mods, with the only redeeming feature being both are able to inflict Storm Lash. This makes Basileus' CQC style a preferred combat style over ranged combat for the first 5 minutes. Overall, Basileus is an incredible unit for anyone to have in their roster. A fun and viable unit, with an interesting and powerful kit, that makes him sought after by many who prefer his style. I'm glad to be able to get him in my free 10 pulls. Now go out there and allow Basileus atone for his sins by assisting in the battle to defeat Satan. Before I end the video, I would like to apologize for the late release of Basileus' video. I now have a job that requires me to be present at work for 9 hours a day and 6 days a week. Coupled with my relatively bad state of health, expect delays for most of the review videos in the near future. I would apologize for this matter. That's all for me. Moga out.